Welcome to Beyond Damascus, the show where encounter meets mission. I'm going to be your host today. My name is Dan Dimite, and I'm joined here in studio with Brad Piron.
Yes, sir.
And
Hey,
Aaron Richards. What is up, brothers? You excited for today?
Feeling good.
Oh, it's so good. Hey, if you're joining us for the first time, this is the podcast where we engage in critical questions that you, our audience, ask, and then we spin these questions to talk about how we can also go on mission. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw a question out. We're going to give our 2 cents on the answer to that question. And then we're going to close with a mission momentum, how we can take that question and those answers into the momentum of our week to live a life on mission. Hey, you guys feeling like missionaries today?
Feeling pretty missionary. Aaron, you?
That's the dumbest question ever. How do you feel missionary?
Well,
I woke up feeling missionary today.
Close your eyes and ask yourself, am I feeling missionary today? And see what the response is.
Hey, Jack, how's that question coming?
The other question. Wait, what?
Yeah.
No, wait.
I thought that was the question we were
Yeah, that was. Are you feeling missionary today? That's today's question. No, Jack, could you please enlighten us with the wisdom of our audience and give us a great question?
How do I live in the tensions of my desires and God's will?
Oh, that's a good one. So how do I live in the tensions of my desires and God's will? Dun, dun, dun. Okay.
I think I'll take the first step at it. Oh, did I make both of those? That's left-handed. That's a finger roll too. So 2 cents are now in the mission jar. I love this question. I think if, any of us who have lived a life that's oriented towards the Lord realize that there are times in our life where we find desires that might not be aligning with what we've been instructed are God's desires. And I was really impacted early in my conversion in reading a book by Dr. Ralph Martin called The Fulfillment of All Desire. And amongst other things, the book just points to the fact that God is ultimately the fulfillment of all the desires of our hearts, even the ones that are misaligned at first, right? Mm-hmm. And so I guess when I hear this question, if I were asking it, I think a tension I might have is okay, so I'm seeing these desires I have and I'm pursuing them, and I'm not sure if ultimately God is the author of those desires. Well, what we can be sure of is God is the author of whatever is under all of our desires, because what's under all of our desires is God. And I think in our Christian experience, sometimes we, in fear of sin, will teach people that we need to just do away with desire, right? So, hey, abdicate all desire, set it to the side, and just pursue the intellectual life and relationship with God that understands he's the way and the truth and the life. But in Dr. Martin's book, I love that he points to the fact that no, go deeper into that desire. The surface level desire might be the thing that you're thinking is not in alignment with the Lord, but he is under it. So keep pressing. So if you're finding yourself drawn to something that you don't want to be drawn to, ask why you're drawn to it. Find what the impetus is for you pursuing that. And ultimately, if you go deep enough, the answer to that's going to be God. So I would answer this I guess I would answer the question specifically. So how do I live in the tension, between my desires and God's will? I would say recognizing that God's will is for you to find the depth of those desires. So the way to live in the tension is to press deeper, not to rid yourself of them when at surface level they don't look in alignment with God.
I love that. Aaron, what do you think about Brad's 2 cents?
I think that's awesome. as I hear this question, I'm having a hard time even just taking this outside of my own personal context, right? Mm-hmm. That is you have to remind yourself of that. I have to remind myself of that I'm stuck in this moment right now where I am struggling because my reality, my expectation for what God promises isn't lining up with the reality of the moment and what I desire from it. And we need to realize that my desire rightly oriented actually does align with God. Mm-hmm. So if there's a misalignment, something's got to change, and that thing has to be me. And that's just a great invitation to remind ourselves of that.
I think sometimes in prayer we can think our bad desires shouldn't be talked we shouldn't bring those to God. And I think it's so beautiful when we bring the subject of prayer is our thoughts, feelings, and desires. And so even if my desire is something disordered, right? If I desire,
that's great, Dan.
So I can actually bring that disordered desire to God and say, God, why do I have this? And it's exactly, then God, he starts speaking to us in that disordered desire. And he says, you have this, because you want this, and then because you want this, and because you want this. And as you're saying, Brad, the end of that questioning with God is always going to be clarity. And it's at the end of that questioning actually where the power and the healing is, right?
Yep.
That and God doesn't, I think sometimes we think of God's will as this like external thing I have to do. Like Paul says to the Thessalonians, this is God's will, your holiness. Like God just wants you. He wants a relationship with you. So like what all of these desires that you have, he like the end is just so that you talk to God about
Right.
them. And so that
Right.
you can have union with him and relationship with him. And so whether that you think they're good, whether other people think they're good, like what they are there, now bring them to him and have a conversation.
Yeah, and if you press like into them enough, the ones that at least I hear all the time when I'm walking with people is if you're pressing deep enough, you're going to find I desire a relationship.
Yeah.
I desire greatness. I desire something to do with my life that matters more than the moment. Like there's a pretty consistent like series of deep desires, and once we get there, we recognize that the path
Yeah.
to all of
I got
them is
some 2 cents here.
Oh, shots!
Oh,
that was
so
close.
No,
Dang it.
no, today.
Not
You
today.
didn't make them.
It's gonna be worth it. Just wait. Okay, so this
I like what
Just
Jack
wait.
loses it. The laughter from outside the shot.
There will be a day where I make everyone.
I'm keeping a tally of how many times we can make Jack laugh on the show. I've got 2 so far. Just FYI,
I have probably 0.
that's
I'm
3.
working.
300. This summer, I had the opportunity to give a teaching on God's will at summer camp, and it's funny when we talk about God's will because it's like this big mysterious thought that we think about, and the reality is God communicates His will to us very clearly. In one particular place is in the teaching of the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, that we ought to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That God's kingdom would come and that his will would be done on earth as it is in heaven. So God's will, as he expresses it to us, is that earth would become like heaven. And sort of to get to where you were going, Brad, that our desires ought to be oriented to a heavenly reality. And each of us can kind of imagine what we believe heaven is like. But when I'm asking, like, how does my desire for this thing fit into God's will? The answer can be, well, what does that thing look like oriented toward heaven? Right? When I think about my finances and the anxiety I have for my finances, my will is that, I'll do something extreme that may never happen, right? My will is that I would be a millionaire missionary, right? God, what do my finances look like in heaven? I'm not going to be poor, but I'm not going to be attached, right? That there's going to be a reality that I've got I was praying about this a number of days ago, that when I think about my experience in heaven, like that I'm overcome with a joy and a peace and a satisfaction of realizing that I can rest confidently in God, that my relationships are going to be oriented toward God. And I think the fruit of that, when we adopt that perspective, is that tension between my desires and God's will begins to diminish as I let go of those things that I'm attached to. And I think that perspective toward detachment in life, it's a really healthy thing.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot because I think that one of the shames of the generation that we're in is we've lost how amazing heaven is. Like we've like made heaven boring. And I think that like if heaven's the end of what we're made for, like what is it? It's God's will perfected, right? Like it's us fully alive. It's us fully engaged with the one who created us. And sometimes when we talk about heaven, it's just kind of like, well, it's where good people go and you just kind of exist there forever, And it's life here perfected. And we don't even know how to comprehend that. We don't know how to understand worship and orientation to God the way that it'll be in heaven, but pushing towards that heavenly reality now, like what can we engage in right now that would be as adventurous as heaven could be? I just think we have to start reshaping just what people think of when they think heaven. It's not Casper the Friendly Ghost floating around for all of eternity.
That's actually all I've been thinking heaven was. What? Can we talk after the show to make sure we real?
You're the exact one I was thinking about. I was
know.
like, Dan
I just
has
keep
made
praying. I
heaven
can't
boring.
wait to be Casper.
Dan's like, I cannot wait to sit down and just be there for all of eternity.
I always like the guys, the really fat ghost in Casper that was able to eat a whole bunch.
Yeah.
That's what
I
thought
was thinking Ghostbusters.
Oh, that was
Is that Ghostbusters? I was like, that's not Casper.
What's
But
that
so
case?
maybe,
So when we diminish heaven and the glory of heaven, the result is we elevate the earth.
Exactly.
So like we're like, oh, heaven's not that great, and because heaven's not that great, well, I need to live everything now.
Yeah.
And we start panicking.
Our
and so-
earthly desires take precedent instead of our heavenly ones.
and so then our earthly desires, I think, become so big and so urgent, and they almost start to become Lord as opposed to Jesus being Lord. And I think what you're saying, Aaron, is so profound, is that sometimes these desires, like I'm like, oh my gosh, God doesn't want this for me. And like we start thinking about his will in tension or at war with our desires. But like Brad, you were saying, no, just go deeper into those. I think Aaron, you're saying go wider. So like when you go deeper, you find relationship with God. When you go wider, you realize your desires are a little fickle. Like sometimes like our desires are just they're carnal, they're fleshy. Like you really just want things that are fading. And even if they're good desires, so like even if it's like, man, I really want this relationship to work out. Do you realize that relationship has an end date, right? Like that everything, in view of the grandeur of God, the things that we desire in life are pretty small and insignificant. It's all rubbish, if you will, as Paul says. And so I think that's awesome. I love that. All right, my 2 cents. Woo woo. All right. Okay. What do I want to say? I think God loves your desires. Like whoever's asking this question, like he planted those desires in you and he's fascinated by them. I think if we think about God the Father as a father who loves his children and looks at his children with fascination, my kids, like they're each different. And I'm fascinated by the things that they're passionate about, right? Like my 2 youngest daughters, they are just like arts and crafts and like they're always just building and creating and it's just beautiful. And when I see those desires in them, I want to magnify those desires. So I want to pull them out. So God, I think, God doesn't want to destroy your desires. He's fascinated by them. He loves them. And when he sees them, he sees his image and likeness, his own image and likeness manifested in and through you. So I think we can look at what God wants to do with our desires when they seem at war with or in tension with his will for your life is he wants to transform them and do something even more beautiful. So you see Peter and James and John and Andrew, the Lord, his call, when he called them to himself, he said, no longer will you be fishermen, but fishers of men. And they no longer stopped. Like, it wasn't like, hey, what you were doing, you're just never going to do anymore. Like, my will is that you're just not happy because I know you love the sea. No, like, that you still see their whole life is around the sea, that throughout their following of him, he brings them back. The invitation with Peter of his call, he was brought back at the after the resurrection, back on the water, that God has these things in your life that he wants to transform. No longer will you be fishermen. Okay, so it may not be exactly what you thought, but you're going to be fishers of men. I'm going to transform it. And so when you have a desire that is opposed to God's will, my suggestion would be you put it on the altar, and you whatever hits the altar of God gets transformed. So bread and wine becomes body and blood, right? If I put my desire on the altar, like, God, I really want this, and I don't know, it doesn't seem like you want this for me, I'm going to offer it up. Like Abraham offering Isaac. It's that act of offering that allows the desire to be transformed into God's will. And so the two may not be opposed, they may be together. And I think this question too, I think a lot of times the desire may be like for healing, right? Like my mom is dying of cancer and I desire that she be healed from cancer, but that my mom's not actually dying from cancer. This is an analogy. I desire that she be healed, right? But it may be God's will that she not be healed in this earth, right? And so if I lay that desire on the altar, then God's able to transform us. So I start seeing healing from heaven's perspective, right? And I love what Paul says to the Romans, right? He roots us in the Father, and he says, "For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received a spirit of adoption through which we all cry, Abba, Father." The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if only we suffer with him so that we may also be glorified with him. So the beautiful thing about Christianity is suffering is transformed into resurrection. Suffering is transformed into glory. So no matter how bad God's will may look, like it may be God's will that the cancer isn't healed and that your mother passes. But the beauty of the gospel is that that suffering is transformed into resurrection. And only in Christianity do we find that kind of beauty. So wherever there's tension between God's will and your desires, I think just ask God, how do you want to transform this so that I see it like you see it?
Mhm. I think the bridge there is trust, right? I think sometimes when we find ourselves in a tension between our desires and God's will, what we'll presume is that he might have desires that are antithetical to mine.
Yeah.
Like they're like,
He doesn't want what's good for me.
he doesn't want what's good for me.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I was thinking about your analogy with the altar, which I think is awesome, because I actually go to that whenever I'm walking with someone in discernment. I'll use the altar image a lot, because on the altar, one of two things happens. The altar, it's either burnt up or it's multiplied, right? It's burnt up or it's multiplied. We can see that even in like the candles in the Eucharist. You can see it in the Old Testament too. Like that's what's happening on altars, and both are pleasing to God because there's an offering. An offering's made, and what happens to the offering, we can entrust to God. And whatever happens of it will be pleasing to him and will be for our betterment. That offering, for me to be detached from it, if it goes away or goes into something different, I can trust that God is in it for my flourishing. So that's okay. Yeah. If it multiplies, and you can like imagine, like if you're listening and you're discerning vocation or something, imagine that in this same light, right? I'm in this relationship and I'm not sure if I'm supposed to, well, put it on the altar. Like, how are you experiencing it with the Lord? Is he drawing you further in, multiplying it? Is he pulling you back a little bit? Okay. Well, we can make decisions on that because we can trust that he's in it for our flourishing, you know?
Amen.
Beautiful.
Got anything, Aaron?
I'm ready and raring to
Ready.
go for some mission momentum.
Can I throw one thing before we go there?
No. You've already given 2
come
cents.
on,
You've
come
given
on, come
2. It's not called 3 cents.
I
Brad.
know, but I'm gonna pull one out.
Right,
I only put
you
one
get
in
to tell
there.
the one that Aaron didn't make.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Yeah,
That's fine. I was thinking about the concept of desire as well, and I think that we have allowed ourselves to define God's desires from ours instead of ours from his too. Like, take the perspective of like, what does God desire for my life? Lord, help shape my desires to match that. I think a lot of times in our Christian walk, we can just be like, I really hope God has the same desires I have. I really hope his heart is the same as mine. And if we make that prayer instead, God, give me your heart for me and for those around me. Help my desires be yours. Like, we'll find more success in that prayer than, God, I really hope your desires are mine. Make mine yours instead of like, make yours mine.
That's super good. That was definitely a new 2 cents, but it was a good 2 cents. If you're angry and bitter at Brad for adding an
I think they're
additional 2
excited.
cents,
Put some
could you
comments
please
if you're like,
comment?
this
Yeah,
edified
yeah.
my whole life,
Yeah,
and
no,
Dan needs to
it is
allow
good.
it to happen more. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, it's conformity. I mean, it's not about conformity with the will of God. It's about uniformity with the will of God, which is beautiful. Okay, mission momentum. Who wants to share their mission momentum? How you're going to take this question into your week on mission this
Good.
week.
Let me jump on it. So our creative team here at Damascus, we're reading a book called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. And it's an incredible dive into what can happen when I orient my life around uniformity, around uniforming my will to God's will. And the beautiful way that Brother Lawrence identifies like the key to this happening is just orienting ourselves from a standpoint of, God, my reason for doing what I'm doing today is out of love of you. That my love for you would actually motivate my activity. So my mission, my challenge for us for mission momentum today, for this week, is to pause your day anytime you can bring this to your mind and ask myself, okay, why am I doing this next thing? Why am I going to make this phone call? Why am I stepping into this meeting? Lord, I'm stepping into this meeting because I love you. Lord, I'm entering into this phone call because I love you. I've tried to incorporate this into my own leadership here at Damascus, that sometimes we have opportunity to open our meetings in prayer. I always like to begin our meetings in prayer that Jesus, we love you.
Mm-hmm.
That this is the rooting statement. And if we can foster that consistent motivation of love of God, that all of a sudden those things that would draw us to love my own things, to love my own desires, to love the things of this world will begin to fade.
That's so good.
It is good.
There you have it.
There you have it from Aaron Richards himself.
My mission momentum is going to just orient around this idea of desire. So with the desires that we have, I would encourage all of us included, this week, permitted that it's not sinful, right? If there's a desire that you find on your heart, I want to like encourage us to engage that desire and welcome God into it. Because I think sometimes we can even find them to be foolish. It's like, I desire ice cream today. It's like, okay, eat ice cream and celebrate with the Lord. Like, I just think sometimes like we can see how interested he is in the things on our heart when we welcome him into these little desires that we have. So this week, a desire that you'd usually question or ask if it was too childish or if it was really necessary, actually engage it this week and welcome God into it while engaging it. And I'm interested to see just the fruit that comes from recognizing he's actually interested in the things that I'm partaking in right now, no matter how small.
That's great, Brad.
That's good. Okay. Mine's going to require you to talk to someone and do something in a missionary way. So there's always people we know, whether it's a family member, whether it's a coworker, a classmate, who they have impure desires.
Mm-hmm.
Their desires are disordered. And so, and we see that and we can either get frustrated with it or kind of annoyed by it. I would suggest, going off of your 2 cents, your first 2 cents, Brad, that the end of all of those desires is God, that you would ask God to reveal to you what that person is truly desiring through their disorder. And so like, if it's, if they're in a impure relationship or whatever, like, what are they actually desiring? Maybe they're desiring authentic love, and whatever, pick the person, ask God to show what is their deepest desire, God, behind this action, and then talk to them about that deepest desire, right? And they may not even know that it's there, but actually have a conversation with them in some way about that desire that maybe they haven't seen or heard God speak into. I think that'd be really awesome to change someone's life. And
I like it.
I think we want to live a life that changes lives. We want to help people be blessed. And so that's exciting.
Yep.
Okay. That brings us to the end. So we just want to remind you that you've been listening to Beyond Damascus because you may have forgotten. So that's why
at some point through Brad's multiple rounds of 2 cents.
So this is the show where encounter meets mission. Honestly, I think this question was a great question. A lot of people wrestle with this. And so if this has blessed you, or if you know people that wrestle with this question, go ahead and share this episode with them. That in and of itself is a missionary activity. So share this. This show is also a show on mission. And if you subscribe to Beyond Damascus, we have a mission partner who will give us $10 towards a camp scholarship for every new subscription this season. So you hitting allows us to send kids to Catholic Youth Summer Camp, which is a beautiful opportunity. So like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff to help us evangelize. And we want to close every episode by reminding you that
mission makes sense. That's right.
That's so fun.
Get it?
Okay.
Mission sense.
Yeah,
That's
we're
good.
doing it. We're doing it big. Thank you so much for loving the Lord and sharing the good news of the gospel. Join us next week on Beyond Damascus.